Good morning. Sorry I came late, but at least I'm here. My DG is also not with us. He was attending another meeting at Kawi House, but he has indicated that this afternoon he might be with us. So I'll just give a few comments on what has been discussed, which is very important. First is to thank POAC for organizing this conference. I think it's a long journey we've walked. I think I was one of the people POAC came first to tell me of the idea to form an association for retailers. And I think they can attest that we are the greatest supporters, and we supported them so hard that it looked like we were getting into the industry politics, because on one hand we have the multinationals, and then on the other side we have the independents who are forming an organization just to champion their own issues. But we are happy that they have been able to stand, and now we can canvass these issues together, and we can logically discuss issues that are affecting the independent dealers in this industry. So I think I will just touch on the issues that have been raised here, more importantly to start with the issues of pricing. Pricing, here I've had the issue of margin being mentioned, that dealers are suffering, transporters are suffering. But just to tell the team that we did a cost of service study in 2018, and that is what we've been implementing to date. And I think the person who conducted that cost of service study, it was led by Engineer Mwangi, is here. I think he'll make a comment. That cost of service study was done by Kenyans, people who are very experienced in the sector, people who've worked in this sector for over 30 years. So they understand the supply chain very well, and it is split the supply chain into different nodes, and we looked at each node, the cost components. There was public consultation. Probably at that time we were not as organized as you are today, so the consultants may have come to fragments of people in this room. But I am happy to say that in the report that they gave, a recommendation was given that a COSOP has to be done every 5 years. So we are going to the 5th year in 2023, and we have already developed terms of reference for a new COSOP study. So during that study, the consultant that we will have identified as IPRA will be able to come to yourselves for views. And this is very important, because when you give them a perspective of a cost, you need to support it by documentation. Otherwise, if you don't support it and say doing ABCD, like maintaining a vehicle is expensive, then we need to see the history of maintenance, and then they can calculate the average maintenance cost. So it's something that we can carry over and put it in the pricing. It is at the same time that the retail margin was split. Initially, we had a gross retail margin, but it was felt that, and it was about 3 shillings and 89 cents. So it was felt the retail sector incurs a lot of expenses as opposed to the wholesale sector. And when we looked at the cost components, like for wholesale, initially we were giving 7 shillings to the wholesaler, but it was reduced to 3 shillings and 5 cents. Of course, then we add a financing cost and a cost of secondary storage. It comes to about 4 shillings and 20 cents for PMS. And then for the retail side, then we have the retail investment margin. This is the return to the person who have invested money in a retail station. So we looked at the capex of doing a retail station, and then any attendant costs that may come with putting up a retail station. A model retail station, we looked at the bill of quantities, and I think I remember the figure was, for you to put a station, you need like 79 million. This is a standard station that is selling about 250,000 liters of product per month. Then we looked at the maintenance costs, and Engineer Mwangi is here, he can tell you. From that build-up, we were able to come up with a figure of 4 shillings and 5 cents for the retail investment margin. Then we came to the operating margin. And the operating margin, lucky enough, in 2018, after a lot of noise from retailers that you are not getting return on your investment, we sat with a group of yourselves, and we were able to develop a model for the retail operations expenditure. What we came up with that time was 3 shillings and 89 cents. Previously, the margin was 3 shillings. We added an 89 cents. So in 2018, we just validated and checked, has that build-up changed from what we had done in 2014? I think it was about 2014. And we found there was some escalation of costs, and that is how we arrived at the 4 shillings and 14 cents, which is the retail operating margin. So as we go to the next cost up, we know there are factors that have changed in terms of escalation, like minimum wage. We know utilities like water, electricity, they have gone up from where they were in 2018. And these are the things that now you need to tell the consultant, but please support it with documentation. If it's electricity charge, can we get your bill and see how much you're paying? If it is water, if you have a genset in the station, you tell us. There's power blackouts many times. You can give us evidence of how you are supporting your power costs. And then, of course, is the issue of the attendance you have at the forecourt. There are things like cash in transit. There are things like licenses, which are very important. I think there's multiple licenses that you are charged. So you give us just a breakdown. I don't know whether Mohez is in this room. I think we sat with Mohez. He was a chairman of that group at that time. And we did some very good work because we could ask for receipts, and the receipts are brought, and then we can be able to calculate. Like now for the attendants who are in your employer at the station, so we'd ask, do they do tax returns? Those are things that we check when we are looking at the remuneration for the cadre of staff that you have in your station, so that now we can inbuild it in a model, and then we give you a return on investment, and that will give the retail margin. I think in terms of standards, I've had a question about standards. I'll just highlight in brief. In terms of standards, we have the KS-EAS 980 of 2020. This is a retail outlet specification. So it has categorized the stations to a tier 1, 400 square meters, tier 2, 900 square meters, tier 3, 1,500 square meters, and a tier 4, which is 2,200 square meters. So in the tier 4 is the biggest. You have tanks, each product 85,000 liters, 3 products, that's 255,000. So, but the standard allows you up to 260,000 liters. Then you can put an eatery, you can put a car wash, you have a service bay, and then you can have biofuels in the same station. But in that tier 4 category is the highest tier. You can still have an LPG filling point for autogas, a tank of about 4.5 tons. So these standards were developed through a consultative process. So Kenya Bureau of Standards and ourselves, we don't decide. These are balloting process. So I believe it is not a static document. It's a document that we can keep on discussing with yourselves. But of importance is to bring the aspect of safety. When we say that we need 400 square meters for a minimum, the lowest tier of stations, there's a science behind that. We have looked at the distances that you need to maintain between like the forecourt, the offloading area. We have even looked at the turning radius of a vehicle. When it delivers fuel, what is the turning radius of that truck? Because if, again, we constrict this space so little, and then we have issues of vehicles delivering and they can't do a proper turn, then we get into an accident. I think you all remember last year there was a huge fire somewhere in Kwale. Somebody was delivering fuel to a 2-pump station, and then they were using a normal petrol pump. And then what happened is that there was a fire, and the whole station burned down, the truck burned down. So in a way, we are also trying to protect you as investors. Let me say that since independence up to 2018, petrol stations have been licensed by the provincial administration because they were termed as low-risk kind of investment. But now with the kind of stations that we have about 4,373 stations in the country. We felt in 2018 that it is important that we bring a technical perspective into the way stations are being licensed. So we've just come in, we've licensed a few of the stations in the country, not all, and we are telling the people in this room that it is a requirement that you need to have a license to operate a retail stations. But you might have seen SGS coming around doing technical inspections on our behalf. We are doing a baseline survey. We want to know what is the level of compliance. Even those one pump stations deep down in the village, what is the level of compliance? And we have a scoring matrix. So it is based on that that we'll be able to advise the direction that we'll take. There are those stations that are so bad. When we look at our scoring matrix, they are scoring less than 30% on HSE. So you find those stations, some of them, I won't mention the counties, but we found stations storing petroleum products in plastic tanks. You're storing PMS in a plastic tank. A plastic tank has static electricity. When it is hot, it has fumes on top of the tank. So what happens? You'll get an explosion. So there are those types of stations that we are saying it's a no-no because of the risk. Once we do a risk assessment, we can tell you this one cannot pass any risk assessment that can be done. And we are also trying to protect the motorists who come to fuel in those stations and also the neighbors who are around those stations. So as I say, yes, we can debate on reducing the size, but it has to be supported by some kind of risk assessment that will help me also to take responsibility when I license those stations. So we will continue these discussions. We are not closing our doors. And as I said, standards are not static. They can be changed. But let us sit down and reason and say, this is the smallest size that we can have and we will be safe. Because if a fire occurs tomorrow, the first person to be asked, who licensed this station? And then Bwana Jomo is here, he's been a parliamentarian. They're the first one to summon me and tell me I'm not doing my job. So as we work towards looking at whatever tires that we can go below 2, let's consider safety also. I think I've heard about Lamu. Lamu, yes, we are aware there's a problem there. Actually, 2 years ago, there was a bad accident. There's a boat that collided with another one, and there was a fire. And that's how we became involved. So we have a kind of an operational document we developed with Kenya Maritime Authority, KPA, and ourselves. And we allowed that those floating boats dedicated for fuel can be used for now, and they have a dedicated place where they will operate from. Instead of what was the practice before, people are carrying, you are transporting human beings on a boat, but you have jerry cans of PMS in the same boat. And some of these guys don't care, they start smoking. So we decided first, as a stopgap measure, we have that kind of arrangement, but we are still researching, and I can tell you we are actively involved. And we are looking at jurisdictions like Singapore who have developed proper refueling points for boats. So I think we will learn from that, and we can be able to develop something more concrete about on the issue of fueling of boats. I think the other issue that was raised is on parking. Section 98 of the Petroleum Act gives this responsibility of providing parking spaces, centralized parking spaces for petroleum tankers to the county. So, and Mohammed can tell you in 2015, I believe, we had taken it upon ourselves to initiate the process of creating these parkings. But we were stopped by the lawyers. I think we toured some of your sites that you had proposed can be used for parking, and they were ideal sites. But unfortunately, when we looked at the law, it is a county that is supposed to provide those parkings. So what we've been left with is to engage the counties, and we have been actively engaging Nairobi, Mombasa, Kisumu. I think the most receptive county is Kisumu, because they have asked for the design of the parking. We have given them. I think what they were looking for is the funding to be able to come up with that parking. And we told them it's a low-hanging fruit because they do it under public-private partnership. Us will just enforce parking there and they get money. They'll be charging a fee for it and it will be much safer. So I believe that is something that we'll continue to pursue, especially now that we have a representative of the COG in our board. We have someone from the Council of Governors who sits in our board, and it's a matter that we have already started pursuing with themselves. I think with terms of licensing, I'll just mention in bypassing, yesterday we had our board and they approved that we stagger license periods. So instead of issuing a license for 1 year, I think there are categories of licenses now going forward we'll be doing for 2 to 3 years, just to give you some reprieve. Yes, it is based on a risk assessment. There are licenses like the one for import. I think the import licenses are a bit quite risky. So we have given them 1 year, but for drivers, we have given, I don't remember the number of years, but it's 2 to 3 years. Retail, I think we have also given 3 years, and transporters 2 years. But then we'll be doing the annual audits, and I think it is important for transporters also to note that we'll also be doing audits for your businesses, because we've noted some of you will say in your application that you have highway emergency response plans, but when an accident happens, a transporter stays on ground for 3 days with product that is just posing danger to passers-by. In terms of defensive driving, as I finish, I'll not take long. We've had quite a number of accidents in the country, and we found it necessary. Previously, this requirement was there in 2013, but the cost of doing defensive driving was very expensive. So we decided to waive it for a period. But unfortunately, the number of accidents have kept on going up, and we felt that it is important that we do introduce this requirement as a stopgap measure. Currently, we have 14 accredited schools. KPC is not the only one. I don't know whether Solomon Donye is here. He's the one who kind of represents the defensive driving schools. There are 14 accredited defensive driving schools, and I think now with that number, the cost will come down. Well, we've been looking at the curriculum. It is us who approve the curriculum, because we don't want any person to come up and say they offer defensive driving. So we have approved the curriculum for KPC and a few others. So I believe it is a requirement that is necessary to ensure that we transport our products safely. In terms of the foreign registered tankers, because that question has been asked previously, that we require so much for the local and very little for the foreigners. So there's a framework we're developing to be able to bring into some kind of licensing. I may not say licensing because it's not our jurisdiction, but some kind of recognition of those drivers and trucks. There are some minimum basics that we need. Out of the statistics we've done, 90% of the accidents happening in Western Kenya are not local trucks. You find is a truck going to Uganda, South Sudan. They pose the same risks. So there's an interministerial committee that is composed of EAC, Ministry, Transport, ourselves, that is looking at that. So I think the other issue that was raised by Honorable Jude Jomo is on the issue of the contracts. I think it's a matter that we will keep on discussing. Our view was sometimes it becomes difficult when dealers sign commercial contracts and they commit themselves, then we come to know about the whole story towards the end. So we were not involved at the beginning, but you already committed yourself in a contract, and it is a law of contracts that you are binding. It's a binding document to you and the other party. So we only come in as, I don't know, we call like mediators. And sometimes we may try to do our best to ensure the parties come to an agreement, but well, the contract document prevails. So it is something that we need to discuss, whether you can try to engage us before you commit yourselves to those contracts. Otherwise, if we come to the tail end, it becomes a bit difficult for us. For the young dealers, we hear you. It's something that we've looked in the past and we'll continue investigating it. And if we find there's any abuse, then of course, as a regulator, we can take the next steps. For members joining associations, I think, well, as we follow the Constitution has given the freedom of association, and we are happy because sometimes we being government, I see individual people fear us, but when you come as a group, you can canvass your issues better, and we are able to know exactly what are the directions, policy directions or regulatory directions that we need to take. Thank you very much.